Australia's first involvement in the Vietnam War commenced in July of 1962. 30 military advisors, experts in counter-revolutionary warfare and jungle operations, were sent to assist the United States in training the South Vietnamese Army. These 30 advisors were collectively known as the Team. In November of 1964, Australian Prime Minister Rob Menzies introduced into law compulsory national service, or conscription, for 20-year-old Australian males. This provided the Australian Army with a greater pool of infantrymen who could now be sent into South Vietnam. In April of 1965, in order to support the massive step-up of deploying US forces, Prime Minister Menzies announced that the 1st Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, would deploy to South Vietnam under the command of the US 173rd Airborne Brigade. 1RAR's attachment to US forces began to highlight the differences between Australian and US operational methods. Subsequently, military leaders from both nations agreed that future deployments of Australian combat forces would operate in their own tactical area of responsibility, the Phuoc Tuy province. The Australian Army would now fight its own tactical war, independent of the United States. In April of 1966, the 1st Australian Task Force deployed to Nui Dat. Initially a brigade-sized formation, 1 ATF consisted of 2 infantry battalions, 5 RAR and 6 RAR, a squadron of armoured personnel carriers, and a regiment of artillery, in addition to engineering, signals and rotary wing squadrons. In total, approximately 4,500 men, the largest Australian force deployed since the Second World War. Let's talk about the enemy 1 ATF was facing, the Viet Cong, or more specifically the VC 5th Division of the People's Army of Vietnam. Consisting of 2 infantry regiments and the D445 local infantry battalion, it also included an artillery battalion with 82mm mortars, in addition to engineering, signals and reconnaissance battalions. There were also the guerrilla forces, roughly 400 men, who had been recruited by the Viet Cong from the local civilian population and who possessed an intimate knowledge of the Phuoc Tuy area. In total, the VC 5th Division was of a comparable size to 1 ATF, approximately 4,500 men. By July 1966, 1 ATF had completed its occupation of Nui Dat. In order to create a protective zone around the base, 5,000 Vietnamese civilians had been forcibly resettled, including the entire village of Long Tan, which was subsequently destroyed. This protective zone was designed to protect Australian forces from the Viet Cong 82mm mortars, which only had a range of 3,000 metres. With Australian forces now effectively outside the range of Viet Cong artillery, the defences of Nui Dat were strengthened and completed. 1 ATF was now established and finally ready to focus on the mission, impacting Viet Cong freedom of action within the Phuoc Tuy province. Under the command of Brigadier Oliver Jackson, Australian combat patrols began offensive operations, penetrating Viet Cong bases to the north and the west, and coming off better after a number of engagements. Meanwhile, the VC 5th Division had been given the task of isolating Australian forces from the capital, Saigon. Frequent enemy ambushes were conducted along main supply routes, coordinated from the Viet Cong Divisional Headquarters, located in the Mai Tao Mountains to the north. Whilst Australian forces were aware that a sizable Viet Cong force was operating within the Phuoc Tuy province, despite frequent combat patrols attempting to locate such a force, the enemy remained elusive. Until finally, in late July, Australian Signals Intelligence intercepted a radio transmission. It was coming from the jungle, deep in enemy territory, and it was moving towards Nui Dat. Only a significant Viet Cong headquarters possessed such a capability, and it was assessed that the transmission belonged to the enemy 275th Regiment, which was known to be operating within the province. Over the next 2 weeks, the radio transmission continued to move south. By mid-August, one ATF commander, Jackson, was aware that a regiment of Viet Cong was likely within range of Nui Dat. Alpha and Delta companies from 6 RAR, along with SAS Special Forces, were sent on reconnaissance patrols, but were unable to detect anything of significance. On the night of August 16th, the enemy Viet Cong regiment had moved into a rubber plantation in vicinity of Long Tan. As night fell, enemy machine guns, RPGs and mortars were prepared, all aimed at Nui Dat. At 2:43 a.m. on the morning of 17th of August 1966, the first Viet Cong artillery rounds begin to impact the south of the 1 ATF position. The artillery barrage continues for another 22 minutes. 24 Australians will be wounded, with 1 KIA. The Battle of Long Tan has commenced.